Hi guys, welcome to today's presentation. My name is Angie Galbraith and we're going to discuss an article from the Week 11 reading list, Research in the World. The article we will be discussing today is When Safety Science Meets the Practitioners. Does safety science contribute to the marginalization of practical knowledge? Written by Peter Almklov, Ragnar Rosness and Christine Størkersen. In this paper, the authors want to explore their proposal that knowledge generated by safety scientists may displace or marginalise existing local or system-specific safety knowledge embedded in operational practices. It shifts from our discussions thus far on theory and methods to instead discuss how our research can influence the world. The authors explain that a common sense notion exists that applied sciences produce information that can be disseminated to practitioners. Knowledge is seen as additive and empowering. The aim of this article is to discuss an alternative view to the theory of knowledge and power with a specific focus on the relationship between safety scholars or scientists with safety professionals or consultants and safety practitioners. According to this proposal, the knowledge produced by safety scientists and propagated by safety professionals is not just added to the existing knowledge of the practitioners at the receiving end, and it is not necessarily empowering when it reaches the practitioners. In the exploration of the foundations of knowledge and power in safety science, the authors use theories on how power and knowledge are connected. Firstly, they discuss whether knowledge that is created by safety sciences is presented to the practitioners in the form of new discourses. This is based on the premise that social phenomena are socially constructed, and the theory that discursive practices play an active role in creating and changing identities and social relations. Secondly, they discuss whether safety management has become subsumed by the more generalised accountability-based mechanisms of governance. This is based on the theory of audit society, where a propensity has developed for auditable risk management practices in organisations that rely upon the regulation of safety through audits and accountability regimes. Finally, they discuss whether information is only useful to the extent that we have appropriate models that enable us to process and utilise that information. They base this on the theory of model monopoly, which occurs when the domain of discourse is delimited in such a way that only one actor has access to a rich repertoire of relevant concepts and ideas, whereas the other lesser actors are lacking such symbolic resources. The authors then move on to discuss how they use the method of abductive reasoning in the development of their theory. They explain how they used cases and interpreted them from a hypothetic overarching pattern, which, if it were true, explains the case in question. The authors use two case studies to support their theory. The first case is a historical account of confrontations between two safety regimes in the Norwegian Rail Administration. The second case is a snapshot of the same trends but in the maritime sector. For the purposes of this presentation, we will focus on the first. The first regime in the Norwegian Rail Administration, known as the Old Regime, was as old as the railways themselves, having been established in 1854. This regime adopted safety knowledge from the UK and it evolved over time through experience. Regarding knowledge content, the old regime focused on risks that were specific to the railways, for example signalling systems or traffic safety rules. Regarding power, the knowledge was considered core competence and a marker of identity among the employees, as mastery of this knowledge was required for many positions within the railway. As the knowledge evolved, it was closely connected to practice and experience. The second, the new regime, entered into the arena in the 1990s. This knowledge and regulations were generic in content and could just have easily been applied to an offshore petroleum installation by simply replacing railway activities with petroleum activities. This practice is not uncommon, and in fact, safety regulation in Australia can be applied broadly across all industries, with a few exceptions for high-risk industries such as mining. The new regime was also associated with changes in authorities and power, for example the introduction of the Director of HSE for the Norwegian State Railways. Following the introduction of the new regime, the old regime was considered obsolete. The first major confrontation between the two occurred following a train collision incident in 1993 that resulted in 5 fatalities. The newly appointed HSE director issued a statement criticising the safety culture and the safety systems in the NSB and putting the blame on the old regime and the safety office. He then arranged for an independent investigation into the incident, further discrediting the ability of the existing Traffic Safety Office. In 1996, the NSB was restructured into the Norwegian National Rail Administration and a new form of the Norwegian State Railways that served only as operator. Additionally, a new governing body was introduced, the National Railway Authority, who chose a regulatory strategy based on safety system audits rather than prescriptive requirements. As the new governing body, the National Railway Authority introduced formal national rail legislation in 1999, a key component being the Safety Handbook. In January of 2000, another train collision occurred and resulted in 19 fatalities. The Norwegian National Rail Administration drew criticism from a public report on the incident, and using the climate that ensued, the National Railway Authority's safety management system was given impetus. What followed was a culture that placed importance on safety management and risk analysis. Line managers and safety staff were trained in this method. The rail administration performed comprehensive risk analyses on all railway sections, as well as numerous technical modifications and organisational changes. The second confrontation between the two regimes occurred in 2000, when the rail administration established a project to revise the traffic safety rules. In accordance with the new risk-based safety management regime, the intention was to apply a top-down, risk-based approach to rule development. However, when the project team attempted to apply this method, they found it was not viable, as it was too generic or abstract to give effective guidance, and therefore they didn't trust the system. They instead turned to a process called reverse invention of safety rules, whereby they used railway knowledge and existing prescriptive rules as the main basis for developing a modified set of prescriptive rules. As they wanted to remain loyal to the new regime, they had to modify the approach it suggested in order to adapt it to the specific constraints of the railways. So what should have happened? Modern safety principles should have reached the Norwegian railways in the form of discrete pieces of information that could be added to the existing body of knowledge. Instead, what did happen was the fierce confrontations between the two knowledge regimes. The system-specific and local knowledge base associated with the old regime was a precondition for successfully adopting the new regime. However, this knowledge lost visibility and status because it was peripheral to the domain of safety discourse defined by the new regime. At the same time, the main spokesman of the old regime lost formal authority as traffic safety was subordinated to the more generic HSE discipline. This loss of authority may also have been a contributing factor with regard to the incident in 2000. The head of the Traffic Safety Office warned the Rail Administration Management of the lack of automatic train control on this particular line. 2 warnings were issued in meetings in 1995 and then followed up with memos in 1996 and 1997. An automatic train control system is designed to stop a train if the driver fails to apply the brakes in front of a signal at danger, and it is possible that this would have prevented the collision in 2000. The Rail Administration senior management did not react to these warnings, and it is conceivable that the head of the Traffic Safety Office may have been more successful in drawing senior management's attention to this problem if he had been in a position of authority similar to that before the reorganisation in 1993. So what this case study shows us is that, firstly, the new knowledge in the form of the new regime did in fact present a new discourse to safety practitioners. Secondly, the safety management did become subsumed by the more generalised accountability-based mechanisms of governance, as identified by the project team reviewing the traffic safety rules. And thirdly, information is only useful to the extent that we have appropriate models that enable us to process information. This was demonstrated by the role of the HSE director and his ability to control information and influence the success of the new regime. A model monopoly certainly existed in this case. Now that the authors have provided what they deem empirical evidence to support their theory, they then continue on to discuss further application in the safety science field and current trends in safety culture. Now that the authors have provided what they deem empirical evidence to support their theory, they then continue on to discuss further application in the safety science field and current trends in safety culture. And at this point, it becomes very safety intensive. So there's 2 points I'd like to highlight that are relevant to all researchers, not just safety researchers. Section 6.5 on page 33 discusses the role and responsibilities of safety science and safety scientists. This is the point that really ties in the title of the paper. Having discussed the existence of discourse, marginalization, and the displacement of power, the authors now discuss to what extent and how safety science contributes to these displacements. Firstly, the authors draw assumptions on the influence of safety scientists in the case studies. This is perhaps the weakest point of the paper. Even though through my own experience in industry, I agree with their assumptions, their justification through the work of Pero, Rasmussen, and the High Reliability Organisation project is somewhat of a long stretch. But they do briefly touch on the idea that there is a tendency within the safety science discipline to generalise, and perhaps exploring this idea further would have more successfully supported their argument. The second point is the discussion of Bratton's theory of model monopoly and how researchers can overcome this challenge. Firstly, you should consider whether your research tends to define a domain of discourse that excludes the voices of practitioners. Consider whether your research invites practitioners to contribute complementary or competing perspectives of their own. Consider to what extent the knowledge you produce reflects the premise and interests of potentially disadvantaged actors. Consider whether your research can challenge dominant knowledge sources that have established a model monopoly already. And finally, consider whether your own research efforts have been captured by a model monopoly with a monolithic perspective. The authors highlight that there may be some benefits in doing this. You may enhance the diversity of organisational sense-making with regard to risk, and you may counteract tendencies to ignore warnings that are at odds with the dominant beliefs and norms in the organisation. The method of abductive reasoning used in this theory building is very interesting. They've discussed a phenomena that is very common within industry, and linking this to the theory of knowledge and power is a very likely explanation. The utilisation of evidence that is already accepted by other scholars is a successful technique as it adds credibility to their argument. The case studies they selected were also successful in providing theoretical insight. However, some of the conclusions they draw utilising this evidence can be weak at times. This paper is very rich in describing the existence of the phenomenon, but loses its strength in the building of its theory. This was demonstrated when they attempted to link the relationship between safety science and industry. There is also a very real threat of this theory contradicting itself. One of the foundations of the argument is the establishment of model monopolies in industry. By successfully justifying their own theory, they run a very real risk of doing just that, as they're creating a discourse, discouraging competing theories, and encouraging a monolithic perspective. Perhaps this is just the nature of successful reasoning, but I think the considerations of Bratton's theory they highlighted would be very helpful when considering your own research. There is an opportunity, though, to shine the light on the influence of research on the world. Whilst the paper did not quite make the link between the two, it definitely made a very good start, and it would be interesting to explore how this theory is further developed and tested. The paper is very suitable to anyone working in the field of safety. I will be forwarding this on to a number of peers, both in safety and in organisational development, as it highlights a significant risk to the development of operating models and safety programs. It is also very relevant to my own field of research, as it has highlighted a perspective on the phenomena that I intend to observe in my research project. It is also very suitable for researchers in other fields, as it provides a thorough example of how our research can impact upon the world. It is very heavy in safety evidence and concepts though, and it may risk losing readers outside of this field. So thank you for listening to this presentation. I'd like to propose 3 questions for further discussion in the forum. Firstly, are the models developed within your field of study typically generic in their application to industry? You may like to further elaborate on whether you think this is a good or bad thing. I ask this question though, because it is often a criticism of safety practitioners. Safety models tend to address the safety industry, therefore further separating the field from operations. Perhaps operational or industry-specific models, or no models at all, will provide more benefit to industry. Question 2. In what context do you think the method of abductive reasoning is most successful? Do you think the researcher needs to have industry experience to use this method, or can you accurately observe a phenomena from an external perspective? And finally, do you think that there is benefit in challenging model monopolies within your own field of research? And if so, what is an example of this? Thanks again for listening to this presentation, and I look forward to the discussions in the forum.